Elias Grant stepped out of the black town car, his polished shoes meeting the pavement of the same high school parking lot he'd once sprinted across as a scrawny, awkward teenager, never imagining he'd return 15 years later as a billionaire CEO. He adjusted the platinum cufflinks on his navy-tailored suit, the crisp fabric brushing against his wrist. Everything about him now screamed success, from the glass towers he owned in Manhattan to the private jet waiting at the nearby airstrip. But tonight, he wasn't Elias Grant of Grant and Royce International. He was just Elias. Back at Westbrook High, he hadn't planned on coming. His assistant had RSVP'd for him without asking, and by the time he realized, it was too late to back out without seeming arrogant. He hated these kinds of things: small talk, forced nostalgia, the same people pretending they hadn't changed. But the moment he stepped through the gymnasium doors, flooded with dim fairy lights and class of 2009 banners, something shifted in his chest. "Elias Grant," someone called from the snack table. He turned, offering a half-hearted nod to a guy he barely remembered. "Hey, didn't think you'd show. You always said you'd never come back." "I didn't mean it literally," Elias said, but he had. He'd clawed his way out of this small town, and he never looked back. Until now. He drifted through the crowd, shaking hands, deflecting comments about his wealth, pretending he didn't notice the sideways glances. He was scanning the room for a quick exit when his gaze landed on her. She was laughing, an easy, full laugh that cut through the boring music. Her dark brown hair framed her face in soft waves, and her green dress hugged her curves in a way that made his breath catch. She wasn't the loudest in the room or the flashiest, but something about her felt anchored. He blinked. "Is that?" he murmured. Elara Zane, a voice beside him, confirmed. "She was in our class, remember?" No, he didn't, not really. She hadn't been popular, or maybe she had, just in a different crowd. Elias had been too busy trying to survive working nights, keeping his grades up, and pretending he didn't care that he never got invited anywhere. But now he couldn't look away. Before he could think twice, his feet were moving toward her. "Elara?" he asked, stopping just short of her. Her smile faltered when she turned. "Elias," she said, her voice smooth, calm. "Wow, you came. You remember me." "I remember a guy who never talked to anyone unless it was about calculus," she teased, her head tilting. "But yeah, of course I remember you," he laughed, a little too awkwardly. "Guess I wasn't exactly the life of the party. You were quiet, focused," she said, her eyes flicking across his face. "You always had that look, like you were already thinking 10 years ahead. I guess I was." "And now?" she asked, curious. "Still planning 10 years ahead," he shrugged. "Sometimes I'm just trying to make it through the day." She smiled at that, really smiled, and something in his chest tugged unexpectedly. "You look different," he said carefully. She arched a brow. "Hopefully in a good way." "Yeah. Definitely in a good way." He didn't miss the light pink rising in her cheeks. "So what do you do now?" he asked. "I teach art, middle school." Wow, that's impressive." "Is it?" she chuckled. "Most people hear middle school and run." "I've been in boardrooms with billion-dollar contracts on the table," he said. "I guarantee middle schoolers are scarier." She laughed again, and he found himself grinning without meaning to. "Want to get out of here?" he asked, surprising himself. She blinked. "You're asking me to ditch the reunion?" "I figured you might want something stronger than fruit punch." There was a beat of silence. Then she said, "Yeah, let's go." They walked out together, her heels clicking softly against the pavement as they made their way to his car. The driver opened the door and Elara froze. "Wait, this is yours?" Elias glanced at the sleek, black car, then back at her. "Yeah. Like, you have a driver," he hesitated, then nodded. "And a jet, and a building in Midtown, and a few other things." She gave a low whistle. "So the rumors are true?" "Most of them," he said lightly, "but I still eat cereal for dinner sometimes." She laughed again, and he found himself watching her mouth more than listening. He took her to a rooftop bar overlooking the city skyline, his skyline. The host greeted him by name and led them to a private table already waiting with chilled champagne. Elara looked around. "This is not fruit punch." He poured her a glass. "I told you," she sipped, her eyes steady on his. "You really don't remember me, do you?" He froze. I'm sorry." "I don't." I sat behind you in AP English, she said. You used to borrow my pens, you never said thank you, guilt twisted in his gut. I was a mess back then, she softened. I know. You looked like you carried the weight of the world, I kind of did. They sat in silence for a few moments, the city glittering below them. Why'd you come tonight? She asked. Honestly, he said. I didn't want to, but… I'm glad I did. She met his gaze, something unspoken passing between them. Me too, she said quietly. He reached for her hand. Can I make it up to you for never saying thank you? Her lips curved. That depends on what you're offering. He leaned in closer, the world narrowing to her eyes, her voice, her presence. Dinner tomorrow night, just us. She hesitated, just long enough to make his pulse spike. All right, Elias Grant, she said. You've got one shot. He grinned, his fingers still wrapped around hers. I don't plan on wasting it. Elias couldn't remember the last time he'd felt unsure of himself, but walking up the stone path to Elara's modest brick house the next evening, he was distinctly aware of the knot tightening in his chest. The neighborhood was quiet, tree-lined, the kind of place where kids rode bikes and neighbors knew each other's dogs. It was worlds away from the penthouse suites and private lounges he was used to. He checked the address again, even though the GPS had confirmed it twice. The porch light flicked on as soon as he stepped onto the first stair, and the front door opened before he could knock. You're early, Elara said, leaning against the doorframe. Her hair was swept up off her neck, and the soft ivory blouse she wore made her look serene and grounded, like she belonged in a painting. He hadn't seen her in daylight until now. She looked entirely different, and even more disarming. I figured being early might earn me points, he said, holding up the small bouquet of wildflowers he'd picked up along the way. She glanced at the flowers, then at him. That depends. Are those from one of the expensive florists, or did you pull over on the side of the road and steal them? I bought them, he said, handing them to her, but I did consider trespassing. A quiet laugh escaped her as she stepped aside to let him in. The inside of the house was exactly what he'd expected, warm, filled with sunlight, and full of small, meaningful details. A worn bookshelf overflowing with paperbacks, a ceramic mug with paintbrushes. A side table with a cracked picture frame holding a photo of her and a woman who looked older but shared the same eyes. She was my mother, Elara said, noticing where he looked. Passed away 2 years ago. I'm sorry. He meant it. She nodded once, then moved toward the kitchen. You want something to drink before we go? Whatever you're having. She opened the fridge and pulled out 2 glass bottles of something fizzy and citrus-colored. It's homemade. My neighbor makes it with oranges from her cousin's grove in California. Don't ask me how it works. He took a sip. It was tart, a little sweet, and completely unlike anything he'd had before. That's insane. Yeah, she said. She sells it at the farmer's market. You'd love it there, but you probably don't do farmer's markets. I do now, he said, finishing the bottle. She raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. Where are we going? She asked, grabbing her bag. It's a surprise. I don't usually get in cars with men I barely know. You got in one last night. That was different. How? I had heels on. I couldn't run even if I wanted to, he laughed, holding the door open for her. Tonight you're safe. I brought flats. Her car ride silence wasn't tense, it was thoughtful. She looked out the window most of the way, occasionally asking about a landmark or building he'd been involved in. He answered each question directly, but he didn't let her steer the conversation too far into business. He didn't want to feel like a profile she was researching. When they pulled up to the restaurant, her eyes widened slightly, but she said nothing. The building was old, restored brick and wrought iron, tucked downtown with no signage. The maitre d' greeted Elias by name and led them to the back where a private garden patio waited, lit by a canopy of hanging lanterns. This is ridiculous, Elara said quietly, looking around. Too much, she hesitated. No, just unexpected, good unexpected? I haven't decided yet. They sat, and menus appeared, but Elias barely looked at his. He was watching her trace a fingertip around the edge of her water glass, her gaze scanning the garden like she was trying to memorize it. You always this quiet on dates? He asked. I'm deciding whether this is a date. Is it? That depends. On whether you're going to ask me about work again," he chuckled. "I wasn't planning to, then maybe it is," they ordered. She got something with roasted squash and goat cheese. He picked the first thing the waiter recommended without hearing the rest. Halfway through the meal, Elara said, "You know, I looked you up last night. I figured, you're worth more money than the GDP of some countries. I'm also terrible at parallel parking, if that helps balance things," she smiled. "You've done well for yourself. I didn't come here to talk about that. So why did you come?" He paused. "Maybe I wanted to see if the girl I never noticed could still surprise me." She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was softer. "You didn't just not notice me, Elias. You avoided people, all of them. I used to think you were broken." He leaned back, folding his hands. "Maybe I was. What changed? Someone finally looked me in the eye and told me I didn't have to be." She tilted her head. "Who?" "My mentor. First job I ever had out of college. He caught me sleeping under my desk and told me if I didn't stop trying to outrun my past, I'd never catch my future." "And did you?" I caught something, not sure if it's what I was chasing. They sat in silence for a few beats. Then she asked, "Why aren't you married?" He blinked. "That's direct. I figured you could handle it. I've been engaged once. It didn't stick." "What happened?" "I hired her brother. He stole from my company. She blamed me. I blamed myself. After that, trust got complicated." Elara's expression didn't shift. "You still seem like someone who wants to be believed in." He looked away. "I think everyone does." She nodded, then stood. "Come on. Where are we going? You brought me to your world. Now I'm taking you to mine." They left the restaurant and walked 3 blocks to a small stretch of cobblestone where a local jazz trio played in front of a bookstore that smelled like old paper and cinnamon. Elara dropped a few bills in the open guitar case and sat on the curb, motioning for Elias to join her. "You're serious?" "Completely." He sat beside her, his tailored suit brushing the pavement, watching her close her eyes to the music. "You don't care what people think, do you?" "I care what matters." "And what matters?" She opened her eyes. "That you're here, and that you're listening." He didn't say anything. He just watched as the streetlight caught the gold flecks in her eyes and the music curled around them like smoke. And for the first time in years, Elias Grant forgot about the next deal, the next meeting, the next move. Because for the first time, he wasn't chasing anything. He was exactly where he wanted to be. Elias stood at the edge of the school auditorium stage, watching Elara from the wings as she guided a group of middle school students through a mural project. The walls were lined with sketches, bursts of color, and paint-smeared drop cloths. It was Saturday morning, and the building was otherwise empty save for the low hum of music playing from a portable speaker. The smell of acrylics lingered in the air. She hadn't expected him to show up. He hadn't planned to, either. But something about the way she'd looked at him at the jazz corner, the way she'd seen him, had stayed with him like a stone in his chest. So when she mentioned she ran a school art club on weekends, he'd asked if he could stop by. She lifted her head, catching sight of him near the door. "You're early again." "I'm starting to think it's a pattern," he said, stepping into the room. "You're in a suit. I had a board call at 8. I came straight from the office." One of the kids tugged on her sleeve. Elara bent, listening, then handed over a new jar of blue paint. She walked over to Elias, wiping her hands on a rag tucked into her apron. "They'll stare if you stay dressed like that. Most of them think billionaires wear hoodies and run tech companies." "Do they know what you used to look like in high school?" he asked, his eyes scanning the paint on her shoes. "They've seen my yearbook photo." One of the girls asked if I was recovering from a tragic haircut. He laughed, then glanced at the mural. "This is incredible. It's a community piece. Students paint sections based on what home means to them." He studied at images of kitchens, windows, gardens, and messy living rooms. None of them drew skyscrapers or boardrooms. They shouldn't have to. He looked at her, quiet for a moment. "You ever regret staying here?" She picked up a brush and dipped it into a can of pale orange. "You mean not chasing something bigger, something louder?" She painted a small sun into the corner of a scene. "This is loud enough for me." He watched the care in her movements, the steadiness of her hands. "You're not like anyone I know. That's probably why you came back. One of the kids called her name, holding up a dripping paintbrush with panic in his eyes. She gave Elias a quick glance. "Stay if you want. There's an extra apron in the supply closet." He didn't hesitate. 10 minutes later, Elias Grant, the man who had once closed a deal in Monaco over a single dinner, was kneeling on the floor, rolling navy paint over a sketch of a front porch. His tie was folded on a chair, sleeves rolled up to his elbows. No one cared who he was here. He found he didn't mind. When the session ended, Elara walked him out of the building. The air was warmer than expected, with spring creeping in through the budding trees. "You painted a porch," she said, glancing sideways. "I had a front porch once, before everything shifted." She didn't press for more. Instead, she said, "You're not terrible with a brush." He opened the passenger door of her car and leaned against it. "I was thinking maybe next weekend I bring lunch, for the kids." She narrowed her eyes. "You want to feed middle schoolers? I can have a chef prep something simple. Sandwiches. Fruit, that kind of thing." She folded her arms. "You do that." "I do a lot more than that." She didn't speak for several seconds. Then, "Why?" He looked at her, the tension between them suddenly sharper. "Because I like the way you see me. And I think I need more of that in my life." Her gaze flicked to his mouth, then back to his eyes. "You don't even know if I'm single." "I know you're not wearing a ring." She stepped closer, her voice lower. "That's not the only reason people don't wear rings." He didn't move. "Do you want me to stop showing up?" She studied him, the street quiet around them. "No." He reached for her hand, brushing his fingers across her knuckles. "Then don't ask me to." She let out a breath and nodded once. "Okay." Later that evening, Elias sat on the edge of his penthouse balcony, the city stretching endlessly beneath him, and replayed the entire day. The mural, the kids, her laughter echoing through empty hallways. He wasn't used to wanting things he couldn't control. But Elara Zane wasn't something he could acquire or negotiate into his life. She was choice and patience and presence. A knock pulled him from his thoughts. His assistant stepped in, holding a thick envelope. This came by courier, from the zoning board. Elias opened it, scanning the content. A development permit. The one he'd filed months ago to tear down a row of vacant buildings, one of which was adjacent to the school. He froze. One of the properties was used by the school for student events. He remembered Elara mentioning it in passing, something about a seasonal art fair. He hadn't connected it at the time. "Put this on hold," he said sharply. His assistant frowned. "Sir, the board already approved." I said hold it, indefinitely. He didn't wait for a response. He turned back to the city, his mind racing. If Elara found out what he'd almost done, what he'd already set in motion, it would shatter whatever fragile trust was beginning to form between them. He'd spent his life building things from nothing. But this was the first thing he'd ever wanted to preserve. And he wasn't about to lose it before it even began. The spring fundraiser was 3 days away, and Elara was up to her elbows in poster boards and raffle tickets when the knock came at her classroom door. She looked up from a list of silent auction items to see Elias standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable, a manila folder in one hand. "You're early," she said, pushing her glasses up with her knuckle. "I needed to see you," he replied. "Can we talk?" She gestured to the folding chair near her desk. "I've got 10 minutes before my next class shows up with glitter and chaos." He sat, setting the folder on the desk between them. She didn't reach for it. Instead, she crossed her arms and waited. "I made a mistake," he said. "A big one?" Her brows lifted, but she didn't interrupt. "Months ago, before we saw each other again, I filed for a redevelopment project. It included a strip of properties near here, one of which the school uses for events." Her eyes narrowed. "The community hall," he nodded. "That space is booked for the entire summer," she said. "Graduation reception, art fair, theater camp, I know. That's why I pulled the permit." She stared. "You what?" I stopped it. "Permanently." "The zoning board signed off already, but I reversed it before the contracts were finalized." "You reversed a multi-million-dollar project?" "I did." She opened the folder. Inside were the official withdrawal papers, his signature across the bottom. "Why would you do that?" "Because I didn't know it mattered, and once I did, it was the only choice." She closed the folder slowly. "You could have told me. I was afraid you'd think I was trying to fix it just to look good. You kind of are." I'm trying to fix it because I care about what you care about. Her gaze dropped to the folder again, then back to him. You're not used to being wrong. I'm used to fixing things with money. You didn't fix this with money. No, he said. I fixed it with a decision and a risk. She leaned forward slightly. Why are you really here, Elias? He exhaled. Because I can't stop thinking about you, about this. I've been building legacies for other people my whole life, but none of it means anything if I don't have someone to share it with. Her jaw tightened. You don't know what sharing looks like. You don't even know what staying looks like. Then teach me. The silence between them stretched, full of unsaid things. You want to build something real? She asked. Yes, then you come to the fundraiser, she said. You help us set up. You fold chairs and haul tables and eat dry cupcakes from the PTA. You stay when it's messy and inconvenient. You show up. I will. Her eyes didn't waver. And you don't get to disappear when it stops being impressive. I'm not going anywhere. The bell rang and voices echoed down the hall. She stood and opened the door, then turned back to him. You know how to find the gym? I'll be there, he said. Tell me what time. That Friday, Elias arrived wearing jeans and a faded t-shirt, his sleeves rolled and hands already stained with paint by the time Elara saw him. He was setting up folding chairs in perfect rows, a clipboard tucked under one arm, and a harried PTA mom barking instructions he followed without complaint. By the time the doors opened to the public, he'd helped string lights, organize raffle baskets, and single-handedly fix a broken mic stand with a screwdriver borrowed from the janitor. Elara watched him from the side of the gym as he crouched to tie a balloon to a child's wrist, his laugh unguarded. He yours? One of the teachers asked, nodding toward him. Not yet, she said before she could stop herself. Later that night, after the raffle prizes were handed out and the last cupcake was eaten, Elara found Elias outside the school, sitting on the front steps with his jacket over his shoulder. You survived, she said, sitting beside him. Barely. I think I lifted a table that weighed more than I do. I saw you fix the mic. It was a loose screw. She nudged his leg with hers. You didn't have to come. I did. The air was cool, the street quiet. I used to think I had to prove myself constantly, he said. That if I wasn't building something, I was wasting time. She looked at him. And now I think the most important things we build don't come with stock options. She was quiet a moment. You know what I remember most about high school? He shook his head. You used to eat lunch in the corner of the library, alone. I remember thinking if someone just said something real to you, you'd stop flinching every time someone tried. He didn't answer for a moment. Then, I don't flinch anymore. No, she said. You don't, he turned toward her, eyes steady. I want to ask you something, she raised a brow. You're not proposing, are you? Not yet, he said. But I am asking if you'll come with me, not to New York, not to anywhere specific, just with me, wherever we go. She didn't hesitate. Yes. He took her hand, standing slowly, and pulled her to her feet. She stepped into his arms without hesitation, her head resting against his chest as the porch light flickered above them. I don't want a skyline, she whispered. I want a front porch. Then I'll build you one, he said. Every board, every nail. And he did. 6 months later, they hosted their first art fair in that same community hall, hand in hand, surrounded by students, music, and a mural that stretched across the wall like a sunrise, each piece painted by someone who believed home was something you made. And this time, Elias didn't forget to say thank you. Elara adjusted the hem of her dress as she stepped out of the town car, her heels clicking softly against the marble pavement of the museum's entrance. She'd worn navy satin, understated but elegant, and the way Elias's gaze swept over her as he stepped around to offer his hand made her breath tighten for just a second. You look like you belong in there more than any of the art, he said, his voice low. I'm only here for the cheese table, she replied, but the corner of her mouth tipped into a smile she couldn't suppress. He offered his arm, and they walked past the towering glass doors and into the atrium, where the annual Metropolitan Philanthropy Gala was already in full swing. Waiters in white gloves moved between guests with trays of champagne, and a string quartet played something soft and expensive in the background. Elara's fingers tightened around Elias's arm as she scanned the room. "This feels like walking into a dream I wasn't invited to." "You're not just invited," Elias said. "You're the most important person here." "I'm not comfortable with that much pressure," she whispered. "Then settle for being the most captivating," he said, and kissed her temple before guiding her toward a couple approaching them. Introductions blurred as donors and board members filtered toward Elias. He fielded them with ease, his tone respectful but clipped, always bringing Elara into the conversation. She watched him carefully. He was different here, precise, composed, but no longer guarded. And every time his hand brushed hers beneath the table, or he leaned to murmur something only she could hear, it reminded her that this man, this world, was one he'd chosen to share with her, not shield her from. A hush swept the room as the director of the museum took the podium. Elias leaned closer. "There's going to be an announcement," she nodded, keeping her eyes on the stage. The director cleared his throat. "This year, our largest single donation came from an unexpected source, a man who, despite his influence, asked to remain behind the scenes. But tonight, we've convinced him otherwise." A spotlight swept across the crowd and landed on Elias. Elara turned to him, startled. "You didn't tell me." He stood slowly, adjusting the cuffs of his dark jacket. "I didn't think I'd need to." The applause built as he made his way to the front, climbing the steps with quiet confidence. He reached the microphone and looked out, his gaze sweeping the room before settling on Elara. "I wasn't planning to speak," he began, "but I've learned there's value in saying things when they matter, especially when you don't plan to." Polite laughter rippled through the crowd. "I spent a long time believing that success meant silence, that if I just worked hard enough, built high enough, I wouldn't have to explain why I kept people at a distance. But someone reminded me recently that the things worth building are the ones you build with someone, not for someone." He paused, his voice steady. "So tonight, I'm not just announcing a donation, I'm announcing a partnership with the museum's education fund. And with the Westbrook School District." Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Elara's eyes widened, her chest tightening. "We're launching a new initiative," he continued, "an annual grant for the arts, specifically for underserved schools. Starting with the one I once walked through every day without knowing what I'd become, and the one that helped me see what I was missing." He stepped back from the microphone as the room erupted. Every camera turned to him, but he only looked at her. When he returned to the table, Elara stared at him, her eyes glassy. "You did that for us." "I did that for them," he said, "because you showed me how." She didn't speak. She simply reached for his hand and held it tightly. The gala blurred after that, more applause, more conversations, but nothing felt as real as the silence they shared in the car afterward. They returned to her house well after midnight. She kicked off her shoes in the hallway and leaned against the doorframe of the kitchen. "You're full of surprises," she said quietly. "I'm not done," he replied, pulling something from his jacket pocket. She tilted her head as he stepped closer, revealing a small velvet box in his palm, her breath caught. "I bought this 3 weeks ago," he said. "Not because I was ready, but because I knew I would be." He opened it. Inside was a ring not flashy but deeply elegant, a single oval diamond set on a slender gold band, timeless and clear. "Elara Zane," he said, his voice lower now, "I've spent my life building empires. But I never understood what it meant to build a home until you invited me into yours. I don't know everything about forever, but I know I want mine with you. Will you marry me?" She didn't blink, didn't breathe. Then slowly she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger and she wrapped her arms around his neck, holding him like the answer she hadn't known she was waiting for. They didn't speak for a long time, they didn't need to. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the kitchen windows as Elara poured coffee into 2 mismatched mugs. Elias sat at the table, flipping through the local paper, his expression soft and unguarded. A photo on the front page showed them at the gala, her hand in his, the ring catching the light. The headline read, "Billionaire's Big Gift and the Woman Who Changed It All." She set his mug down and slid into the seat across from him. "I'm not used to headlines," she said. "You'll get used to being the reason behind them." They clinked mugs, and the sound was quiet, comforting. Outside, children laughed somewhere down the street, and the scent of fresh paint lingered from the porch Elias had started repairing the week before. No fanfare. No flash. Just two people, two mugs, and a quiet morning in a house that finally felt like theirs. And every day after, no matter where they went, boardrooms or art fairs, rooftops or classrooms, they came back here. To the porch, to the quiet, to each other. Because some love stories don't need to be rewritten, they just need to be lived every single day, together.